We spend our lives building fortresses of logic. We tell ourselves that if we can measure it, if we can write it down in an equation, then it is real. We rely on our brains to be the ultimate arbiters of truth. But what happens when the brain stops? What happens when the very organ you've spent 26 years training suddenly fails, and you are forced to see with something else entirely? 9 days ago, a young woman named Mei Chen found out. She wasn't looking for a religious experience. She wasn't looking for hope. She was looking for the answer to a physics problem. What she found instead was a reality that her formulas could never predict. This is her account of the moments her life ended and the person she met in the silence that followed. The air in the lab always smelled like ozone and dry erase markers. It's a clean smell, a safe smell. I was standing at the chalkboard, the large one that takes up the entire north wall. My hand was cramping because I'd been gripping the chalk too hard. I was 26, a graduate student, and I lived for the moments when the math finally started to make sense. I remember the screech of the chalk. It was a sharp, grating sound. I was halfway through a derivative when my chest didn't just hurt. It felt like it had been hollowed out. There was no air. My lungs were suddenly irrelevant. I remember the chalk snapping in my hand. A small white fragment bounced off the floor. That was the last physical thing I saw, that piece of white dust hitting the linoleum, before the world rushed up to meet me. Then there was the ER. It was a blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of industrial bleach. I heard someone say it, 17%. I saw the chart. I saw the numbers. The thing I trusted most started calculating the odds. 17% chance of death. I remember thinking how ridiculous that was. I was young. I was a runner. I had a thesis to defend in 3 months. You don't die when you have a thesis to defend. But as they wheeled me toward the operating suite, that logic started to fail. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. They were opening my back, taking bone from my hip, trying to reconstruct a spine that had decided to collapse under the weight of a hidden defect. I watched the monitors. I knew what the waveforms meant. I watched my life turn into a series of jagged green lines, and then I watched it stop. The sound, that flat, continuous hum. Everyone has heard it in movies, but when it's your own pulse that stops, the sound is massive. It fills the universe. And then I wasn't on the table anymore. Being agnostic, I'd always assumed that death was just off, like a light switch. Your energy dissipates into the grass or the trees, and you just cease to be. But the moment I left that bloody piece of meat on the table, I felt a clarity that was terrifying. I wasn't my brain. My brain was back there, gray and failing, inside a skull on a surgical pillow. But I was here. I was floating near the ceiling, and my intelligence didn't just stay the same. It expanded. I could see everything. I didn't have to turn my head. I could see the top of the surgeon's masks, the way the sweat was beaded on the lead doctor's forehead, the tray of stainless steel instruments. I understood the complexity of the room in a way I never could have with my eyes. That's when I saw him. I didn't call him by name at first. I just saw this presence at the foot of the bed. There were others, beings made of flowing energy that looked like robes, but he was the center. He was composed of a light so dense it felt like a physical weight, yet it didn't hurt to look at him. He looked ancient. He looked like the source of every thought I'd ever had. He had a human face, framed by dark, curly hair that hid his shoulders, and eyes that weren't just eyes. They were windows into a place where time didn't exist. I looked at him, and I knew. This was Jesus. It wasn't like the paintings in the hallways of churches I'd walked past. It wasn't a static image. He was vibrating with life. He didn't use a voice. He didn't need one. He spoke directly into my spirit, a form of telepathy that made my physics degrees feel like a child's finger painting. I watched the neurosurgeons. They were struggling. I could see the tension in their shoulders. I saw them opening my hip to take the bone, and it looked gruesome. It was ugly. But Jesus looked at me, and then he looked at the doctors. He didn't look worried. He looked playful. It was the most unexpected thing. He looked at the surgeons and then back at me, and I felt him say, "Watch this." He reached out, not with physical hands, but with this streaming liquid light. He sent it right through the backs of the surgeons, down through their arms, and into their fingers. I watched as the light lit up my entire broken body on the table. It was like watching a circuit board being powered on for the first time. I knew in that second that I would walk. I knew I would run again. I knew that these men, with all their years of medical school, had no idea that Jesus was moving their hands. I felt this surge of gratitude that I didn't know how to process. This intelligence, this massive cosmic love, was working through them for my benefit, for me, a girl who didn't even believe he existed 10 minutes ago. I looked at the flatline monitor. I knew I was dead, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I didn't want to go back to that body. It looked so small and broken from up here. Jesus kept his eyes on me. He was sending a healing into my spirit form that felt like being wrapped in a warm blanket after being in the Arctic. It was a reconstruction of my very soul. I realized then that my brain had been a filter, a narrow little window that only let in a tiny bit of reality. Now the window was gone. The wall was gone. I looked at the hallway. I felt myself drifting away from the blood and the steel of the operating room. I wanted to see if anyone was there for me. I saw my stepdad. He was standing by a vending machine. I watched him reach in and pull out a Snickers bar. I remember thinking how strange that was. He was a total health nut, always lecturing me about sugar. And there he was, his hands shaking, tearing into a candy bar in the middle of a hospital corridor. I felt a wave of love for him, not because he was perfect, but because he was human. He was hurting, and he was trying to cope with the only thing he had. I looked back at Jesus. The room was beginning to fade. The hospital, the surgeons, the smell of markers, it was all becoming distant, like a dream you forget the moment you wake up. I was standing at the edge of something else, something dark and vast and beautiful. I wasn't afraid. There wasn't a single atom of fear in me. How could there be? He was right there. Jesus moved toward me, and the hospital walls simply dissolved. The last thing I saw of the world I knew was the crinkle of a brown candy wrapper. My stepdad, a man who lived by spreadsheets and organic labels, was hunched over in a plastic chair, his face buried in his hands, a half-eaten Snickers bar resting on his knee. It was such a small, human detail. It was a glitch in the version of him I carried in my head. I wanted to reach out and tell him it was okay to eat the sugar. I wanted to tell him to be kind to my mom, because I wasn't sure I was coming back to help her. But as Jesus moved closer, the gravity of that hallway just evaporated. I've spent years studying the laws of thermodynamics. I believed that energy couldn't be destroyed, only changed. I thought that meant I'd just become part of the soil or a breeze through the trees. I thought me was a collection of electrical impulses in a 3-pound brain. But as I moved away from the hospital, it was a physical sensation of becoming more. I wasn't just Mei Chen, the girl who was obsessed with her GPA and worried about her rent. I was something ancient. I felt a oneness with everyone I had ever met, and even those I hadn't. In physics, we talk about entanglement, how particles that have interacted remain connected across vast distances. This was the spiritual reality of that math. I could feel the energy of every person in that hospital. I felt the exhaustion of the nurse who had been on her feet for 12 hours. I felt the terror of the man in the room next to mine. But it wasn't just their feelings. It was a realization that we were all made of the same light. Jesus stayed right beside me. He didn't speak in sentences, but I understood him perfectly. He was showing me the lattice of humanity. I saw that every time I had been mean to someone, every time I had been judgmental or dismissive, I wasn't just hurting them. I was throwing a rock into a pond that I also lived in. The ripples always came back to me. I felt a love for humanity that was so heavy it almost hurt. I saw a barista who used to make my coffee every morning. I'd never even asked her name. I saw her soul, and it was as bright and complex as a galaxy. I felt ashamed. I had treated people like background characters in the movie of my life. I had looked at people in my classes who struggled with the equations, and I had felt a secret, ugly pride that I was faster than them. Standing there with Jesus, that pride felt like a physical weight. It felt like mud on a white dress. He didn't yell. He didn't point a finger. He just let me feel the truth of those connections. He let me feel how much it mattered to be kind to a stranger at the grocery store. The oneness wasn't some soft, fuzzy idea. It was a raw, humming current. It was the realization that all of our fighting, all of our politics, and all of our intellectual hierarchies are completely irrelevant. In 50 years, no one will care about my thesis. In 100 years, no one will remember my name. The only thing that stays, the only thing that actually moves the needle in this reality, is how we treat the soul sitting next to us. I felt myself losing the edges of May. I was merging into this field of love. I thought, I don't have to go back. I don't want to go back to being that small, judgmental girl. I don't want to go back to a world where I have to worry about money or grades. This oneness felt like home. It felt like the place where the math finally adds up to zero, and zero is everything. Jesus looked at me, and I felt his amusement again. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the way a father looks at a toddler who thinks they figured out how the world works. He knew I was only seeing the beginning. I looked down at my hands, my spirit hands. They weren't made of flesh. They were made of the same light that Jesus was made of, just less concentrated. I realized that we are all made of this stuff. We just forget it the moment we put on a body. We get scared, we get greedy, we build walls because we think we're separate, but there are no walls here. I felt a pull, like a magnet. We were moving faster now. The hospital was gone. The city of Austin was a tiny speck of light below us. We were heading into a darkness that wasn't dark at all. It was a night sky filled with more stars than I had ever seen, and each star felt like a thought in the mind of God. I looked at Jesus, and for the first time, I saw the scale of what he was. He wasn't just a man. He wasn't just a teacher. He was the force that held the stars in their orbits. He was the reason the math worked. And he was looking at me like I was the only thing in the universe that mattered. I wanted to stay in that oneness forever. I wanted to dissolve into that love and never have to breathe air again. I was ready to leave Mei Chen behind. But we weren't done. The void wasn't empty. That was the first thing my scientific mind had to grab onto. In physics, we think of a vacuum as a lack of matter, but this place was thick. It was dense with intelligence. I was standing in the night sky, but I wasn't cold, and I didn't need to breathe. Jesus was there, a pillar of light that felt more solid than the floor of my laboratory ever had. Then the review began. It wasn't a movie playing on a screen. It was a reliving. I felt the weight of my own choices, but I felt them through the hearts of everyone I had ever touched. At 26, I thought I was a good person. I was a student. I worked hard. I didn't break laws. But Jesus showed me the microscopic rot of my own elitism. I saw myself in the university library 3 years ago. There were these girls from a different department. People I didn't think were as smart as me. They were religious. They had offered to pray for me during a hard exam week. I remembered the look on my face in that moment. It was a look of pure, filtered condescension. I had dismissed them because they didn't speak the language of calculus. I had decided their souls were smaller because their intellects didn't match mine. Standing in that light with Jesus, I felt the sting of my own arrogance. I saw their hearts. Their souls were vast, glowing landscapes of kindness. They had genuinely cared for me, and I had used my brain as a shield to look down on them. I felt a wave of hot spiritual embarrassment. I wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to go. Jesus didn't look at me with judgment. He looked at me with a clarity that forced me to see the truth. I had been looking at the world through a keyhole. I realized that when we leave the body, our degrees don't matter. Our publications don't matter. The only thing that carries any mass in this realm is the purity of our motivation. Are we good to others? Do we see the heart or just the surface? I made a silent, desperate promise. If I ever got another second of life, I would never judge a soul by its shell again. The scene shifted. The darkness of the stars gave way to a landscape that defied every law of biology I knew. I was hovering over a field. The grass was a green so deep it felt like it was humming. It was vibrant, as if each blade was a source of light itself. There was no decay here. There was no brown, dried-out earth. Everything was in a state of perfect, eternal bloom. I started to hear these messages. They were simple, too simple for someone who had spent her life studying complex systems. Love is all that matters. Be like a little child. Love is all we take with us. I actually felt a flicker of my old skeptical self. I looked at Jesus and I felt this internal protest. I thought, please, give me more than this. I'm a scientist. I can't go back with a slogan. Give me a formula. Give me the secret to cold fusion. Give me something that proves I was here. Love is all that matters. Sounds like a song lyric. It's not enough. Jesus didn't give me an equation. Instead, he gave me my grandfather. He was just there, standing in that vibrant green field. He had died of leukemia when I was younger. My last memory of him was a shell of a man, yellowed by jaundice, his skin hanging off his bones, his eyes clouded with the fog of morphine. It was a memory of biological failure. But the man standing in front of me was whole. He was radiant. He wasn't the leukemia. He was the stories he used to write to me. He was the way he made me feel like I was the center of the universe when I was 5 years old. He didn't speak with his mouth. He looked at me, and I felt the history of our love. It was a solid bridge between us. He showed me that the only thing we had left in this realm was the love we had exchanged. All his years of work, his house, his cars, his illnesses, they were gone. They had no weight. Only the love remained. He looked at me, and I knew he was asking if I wanted to continue on, deeper into the light. I didn't even look back at the world. I just flew. My soul moved toward the center of the light, toward Jesus, and I hit what I can only describe as an atomic bomb of love. On Earth, we have these tiny diluted versions of love. We love our parents, our partners, our pets, but this was the source. It was massive. It was an explosion of acceptance that shattered every insecurity I had ever carried. Every moment I had felt not good enough, every time I had hated my reflection or felt anxious about my future, it was all incinerated in an instant. I felt like I was merging with the sun. I realized that this bliss is our right. This is what we are made of. We spend so much time in our bodies feeling small and afraid, not understanding that we are tethered to this colossal burning heart of the universe. I felt prayers from below. They felt like thin silver threads pulling at my ankles. People were praying for me to stay, for me to come back to the operating table. I remember trying to kick them away. I didn't want the threads. I didn't want the broken back or the hospital bed or the physics lab. I wanted to merge. I wanted to go so far into Jesus that I disappeared. I was done with being Mei Chen. I was ready to be the light. But as I got closer to the center, the atmosphere changed. The light didn't just warm me anymore. It began to instruct me. I was so close to the center of the light that I could no longer see where I ended and Jesus began. It was a state of pure entropy, a perfect disorder where everything becomes one thing. I was ready to let go of the name Mei Chen. I was ready to let go of the memories of Texas, the smell of the lab, and the weight of my own skin. But then the light shifted. It wasn't a physical movement, but a change in the frequency of the universe. A voice that wasn't a voice, a sound that felt like it was made of thunder and silk all at once, vibrated through my entire being. It said, "Look down." I didn't want to look. I wanted to stay in the sun. But when Jesus commands you to look, your soul obeys. Below me, I saw a river. In my physics classes, we studied fluid dynamics, the way particles flow and collide. This was the ultimate version of that. It was a river of life, a literal stream of souls moving through time. But as I looked closer, I saw that it wasn't just a flow of people. It was a map of energy. I saw some people walking along the banks who were shrouded in a thick, gray-black fog. It wasn't evil in the way we see it in movies. It didn't look like monsters. It looked like fear. It looked like a heavy, cold insulation that kept them from feeling the heat of the light above them. Then I saw others who were glowing. They were connected to Jesus by those same silver threads I had been trying to kick away. Even though they were far down there in the world of dirt and pain, they were tethered to the source. I realized then that the darkness isn't a presence, it's just an absence. It's what happens when you forget you're connected. I saw that it was so simple. I thought, oh, I can just tell them. I can just remind people to connect back to the light and all that fear will just dissolve. It's not complicated. It's not about dogmas or rituals. It's just about turning the connection back on. Jesus looked at the river and then he looked at me. "You are going back," he said. "You are going to work as a teacher." The rejection I felt was instantaneous and violent. I grew up poor. I had spent my life clawing my way out of poverty, using my intellect as a ladder. To me, being a teacher meant a life of struggle, of low pay, of being tired. I wanted the high-rise offices. I wanted the prestige of the research labs. I told him no. I remember the sheer audacity of it. I stood there in the presence of the creator of the stars and I said, "No way. Let me stay here, or at least give me a different mission. Don't send me back to be a teacher." Jesus didn't get angry. He almost laughed at me. It was a warm, booming sound that felt like a hug. He knew my small human fears were based on a reality that didn't matter anymore. He knew that what I called poverty was nothing compared to the spiritual poverty of the people in that gray fog. Before I could argue again, the world tilted. The light didn't fade, it contracted. It felt like I was being squeezed through the eye of a needle. The silence of the stars was replaced by a sudden, jarring cacophony. The first thing I felt was the cold. It was a bitter, clinical cold that bit into my spirit. Then came the weight. It felt like someone had dropped a ton of lead onto my chest. I was being forced back into the meat. I felt the surgeon's hands. I felt the jagged edges of my shattered vertebrae. I felt the place where they had cut into my hip. The pain wasn't just physical. It was the agony of a wide-open soul being crammed back into a tiny, broken box. I gasped. My lungs burned as they pulled in the recycled air of the surgical suite. I heard the frantic beeping of the monitors, no longer a flat line, but a chaotic, racing pulse. I heard a voice. "She's back. We've got a rhythm." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them to let me go back to the green fields and the grandfather who wrote me stories. I wanted to tell them about the Snickers bar and the light through the surgeon's hands. But I couldn't move. I was locked in the gravity of Earth again. That was 9 days ago. I'm sitting in a hospital bed now. My back is held together by titanium and prayers. The doctors call my recovery a miracle of modern medicine. They talk about the 17% odds and how I beat them. They don't know about the light beings who were guiding their scalpels. They don't know that I saw the top of their heads from the ceiling. I look at my stepdad when he comes into the room. I haven't told him about the candy bar yet. I just look at his heart. I see the fear he tries to hide behind his spreadsheets, and I try to send a little bit of that light toward him. I realize that we are all warriors. Every soul that chooses to come here to put on this heavy, painful skin and walk through the fog is a hero. We come here to learn something that can only be learned in the dark. We come here to remember who we are when everything is trying to make us forget. I don't care about my thesis anymore. I don't care about being the smartest person in the room. I'm going to be a teacher, just like he said. Maybe not in a classroom with a chalkboard, but I will spend every breath I have left reminding people that the fog isn't real. I know that I'll mess up. I'm still human. I'll still get frustrated with traffic or worried about my bills, but deep down, in the place where the light hit me, I know the truth. We won. Just by being here, just by trying to be kind, we've already won. We're all just walking each other back to the river. Mei Chen's story leaves us with a difficult truth. For her, the miracle wasn't coming back to life. The miracle was the place she had to leave behind. She traded a universe of perfect love for a body held together by metal and a life of service she never wanted. But maybe that's the point of these accounts. They remind us that the nothingness we fear is actually an abundance we can't yet imagine. Whether you're a scientist looking for a formula or a person just trying to make it through the day, May's experience suggests that the math of the universe is much simpler than we thought. The brain is the filter. The heart is the bridge. And according to a 26-year-old physicist who died on an operating table, love isn't just a slogan. It's the only thing that's actually real. Thank you for listening.